Reading from The Gun Rights War by Neal Knox. This is Section 3, page 145. Targeting Brutality. Dated January 21st, 1994. With the prattling and in coordination with the White House, the TV networks are on a huge anti-violence, actually anti-gun campaign. The networks and movie industry are under attack in Congress and from the people for their violent programming in films, and, as is typical for the left, are attempting to equate guns with violence, never the protection of violence, or the prevention of violence. Not all violence is equal and not all violence is bad. Brutality is always bad. When a woman is raped, that's brutality. If she shoots the rapist, it's violence, but that's not brutality. That distinction between violence and brutality is tremendously important, but seldom made. Leftists never use the word brutality, for only individuals and animals can do brute-like things. They much prefer the softer, generic term, violence, which can apply to natural acts, such as a violent thunderstorm. To the leftists, there is no difference between the violent act of murder and the violent act of lawful self-defense with a knife, club, or gun. That is why the left is so totally opposed to allowing the knife-abiding to carry or even possess in our homes the means of self-defense. Jeff Snyder is a Washington attorney who wrote A Nation of Cowards in the fall of 1993 issue of The Public Interest, which severely dented the anti-Second Amendment fervor of commenter George Will. In this morning's Washington Times, Snyder derides the Clinton and Handgun Control Incorporated scheme to pass a handgun ownership licensing law in the name of assuring safety and technical proficiency with firearms. We don't really care if a thug hurts himself with a gun. What we're worried about is his hurting the innocent. Snyder points out that the Clinton HCI intent is to set up the system by which the government will determine who needs to own a gun, which converts the constitutional right to own firearms into a privilege guaranteed and administered by the government, a privilege granted and administered by the government. Snyder calls for decriminalizing the carrying of firearms, noting that criminals ignore these laws anyway. We must carry arms, he writes, not because we are frightened of crime, but because it's an unfortunate necessity of modern life. We must carry arms because we value our lives and those of our loved ones, because we will not be dealt with by the brute with force or threat of force, and do not live at the pleasure and discretion of the lawless. Failing that, we will be condemned to wonder why criminals have no respect for our lives when we ourselves have no value when we ourselves do not value our lives enough to assume responsibility to defend them. Amen, amen. Nationally syndicated Joseph Sobrin wrote on the same theme in December 12, 1993, Washington Times, stating, "Because the state can no longer protect us from crime, it wants to take away the means of protecting ourselves." Sobrin pointed out that Colin Ferguson knew his victims would be helpless, assuming they were law-abiding. What a pity there wasn't a Bernard Goetz in the same car. The law gives the edge to those who despise the law. That's the craziness of our current way of life. Those who call for gun control, like Bill Clinton and his cabinet, want to increase the criminal's edge. It's so hard to understand that law should give advantage to the law-abiding. Bill Clinton wants to license all handguns in the United States. He affects not to know that the Second Amendment forbids the federal government to infringe on our right to keep and bear arms. He doesn't ask because he doesn't care where the federal government gets the lawful power to require the licensing of guns. He thinks it has the actual political power to do it, and for him, that's all that counts. So law-abiding citizens are left at a disadvantage, caught between a criminal class that disdains the law and a ruling class that disdains the Constitution. Again, amen, amen. Next section is on page 147, called Teens and Guns, dated February 21, 1994. Because of, because of the tremendous amount of crime being committed by young people, there are numerous bills banning possession or transportation of handguns by persons under 18 or 21. Federal law already prohibits purchases by those under 21, so 16-year-olds have a 5-year waiting period, though juvenile crime was one ostensible reason for the passage of the Brady Law. I don't get too excited over restricting firearms possession by youngsters under 18, provided there are adequate exceptions for legitimate uses like hunting, training, competition, and other lawful activities that have parental consent. But I sure don't like extending those restrictions to 21. 18-year-olds are allowed to vote, serve in the military, and are subject to adult statutes against unlawful carrying as well as felony offenses like rape, robbery, and murder. There should be a reform of the juvenile delinquency laws. How quaint that phrase sounds in today's world, to allow publicizing juvenile records the first time that a person is convicted of a serious adult offense. Shouldn't such information isn't even available to judges and sentencing juries, much less the police and prosecutors, who often don't know the kinds of person they are dealing with. As for juveniles having guns, the nation's news media and politicians profess to be horrified by polls showing that over half of high school seniors know where to get a gun. Big deal. 100% of my graduating class at Vernon, Texas high school knew where to get a gun. Looking through my old annual just before our class reunion last fall, I noticed that all-school favorite Ramon Torrey, who subsequently became a greatly respected high school football coach, was wearing a fancy Western suit, and in keeping with the book's cowboy theme, with a cocked and locked and very un-cowboy-like Colt 45 also stuck in his waistband. The snapshot section showed a Mossberg bolt-action shotgun suspended under the dash of somebody Ansel's 49 Chevy, which was always parked just outside the east door of our high school. What caused comment the photo wasn't the ever-present gun, common for the ranch kids to carry in their cars and pickups, but that he had stuck his class ring on the 12-gauge barrel. Guns were as familiar to cars as us, and although we lost kids in school, and since then to car wrecks, drownings, electrical accidents, and the usual array of diseases that plague the nation, and there's some of my classmates even later got on the wrong side of the law, to the best of my knowledge, we never lost anyone to a gun accident or murder, and no one committed a violent crime with a gun. If the availability of guns caused crime, we'd have all been criminals. It doesn't, and we weren't. Despite the hype about proliferation of guns, they are far more available than today, thanks to a series of ever more restrictive laws that had not the slightest effect on crime. Prior to 1968, anyone could buy any gun of any type he or she wanted, short of a machine gun, but included anti-tank rifles and bazookas, simply by sending in a money order and having it delivered by Railway Express, no questions asked, even to gun-banning New York City. The crime rate was a fraction of what it is today. The difference between now and then is that most kids and most adults had respect for ourselves and others. The hoodlums who make the news today do not, and all the gun laws in the world won't change psychopaths into responsible citizens, but they will change responsible citizens into easy victims.
Thank you for supporting our projects. If you'd like to buy us a cup of coffee, check out our Patreon channel.
The guys and gals at gunwebsites.com encourage you to take a CCW class every year, practice at least once a month, and carry every day. Thank you for watching gunwebsites.com.